In this presentation, we're going to talk about how do we go from a sense of loss during this COVID pandemic to that sense of adventure that we need to be able to lead through to a better future, and why leaders and employees are all going through one of the 5 stages of grief. Now, before we get into the presentation, I want to give you a little bit of context as to who we are and why I'm speaking on this topic. My company, Mindshift, does 3 basic things. One, we work on long-term challenges, areas that have been stuck for decades. For example, the challenge of the adversarial nature in capital projects and why so many come in late and over budget. That research led to the book, The Commercial Real Estate Revolution. Then we tackled workplace disengagement. 70% of employees would rather be any place else than work. 20% you're better off paying to stay home than to come to work. That research led to the book, Change Your Space, Change Your Culture. And then more recently, we looked at the challenge of declining physical health in the workplace and why wellness programs have failed to deliver better health outcomes or lower the cost. That now has led to another research project, and that is what's going to take place as we bring people back into the office. So this workbook that you see is titled, Why Employee Mental Health is the Key to Restarting the Economy. This workbook builds on this presentation and provides a guide as employees come back to try to reacclimate to a brand new kind of work environment. What makes our research unique in this regard is that we're looking through the lens of mass disaster recoveries. And we'll talk about this later in the presentation, but looking through this re-entry back into the workplace through the different emotional phases that populations go through after they've experienced some form of mass disaster, either war zones or things like 9/11 or Katrina. And the clinic we worked with on this, the Hidden Value Clinic in Southern California, is an expert on mass disaster recovery. They've described what our nation has experienced and the world as nothing short of wartime conditions. So unless we take these implications seriously, we're going to run into major problems in trying to help our employees reacclimate into the new work environment. So let me begin with the story. On March 12th, our family was in Corpus Christi on Padre Island enjoying spring break. We began to hear some of the preliminary news about COVID-19 and how it was reverberating through the nation. On March the 15th, I went to one of the local stores to get some groceries, and this is what I found. All the shelves for dairy products, for bread, for staples were empty, and it shocked me. It caught me by surprise. I wasn't expecting anything like that. And like many people I knew at that time, we were looking at this as something that would blow over and in a few weeks we would be back to normal. There was no way for us to know what the implications would be. And that's the nature of things that have exponential growth. Our minds are just not capable of calculating just how impactful it might be. And that's why our estimates are grossly overestimated or underestimated until we get some kind of history and track record with what's going on. We have to learn our way into a new normal with this because it completely changed all the rules. So here are some of the things that we will be talking about today. What is it like when we experience significant loss, even in a business context? How do most people normally process loss? I will walk through how do we normally process loss and go through the 5 stages of grief. As I go through each stage, what I'm going to ask you to consider is which stage do you think you're in? And because of the emotional nature of loss, we can be in different stages on different days. I'd like to also talk about why it's hard to lead while you're still processing and dealing with things that you've lost and things that you still feel attached to. I will walk through what it's like when you get to that new sense of reconciling the past and getting ready for that new adventure. That's when you're really ready to lead. Then finally, I'd like to talk about some of the long-term implications of going through this experience together and what building resilience is going to look like for our companies. The first stage in the 5 stages of grief or loss is called denial. That is when we put a happy face on when what's really going on inside of us is fear and uncertainty and anxiety. Now, usually other people recognize that you're in denial before you ever do, but here are some of the signs. One of the first signs is that you ignore the facts or you explain them away. I was in that denial phase when I was in Corpus Christi. I was hearing the facts, but really not taking them fully in and discounting what I was hearing. A second piece is the wishful thinking. We're going to get through this in a couple weeks. It'll go away. We'll go back to normal soon. A third area is that if you're asked some really pointed questions about this, the tendency is to deflect them or not address them at all. That's a sign of denial. A fourth sign is keeping up appearances, appearing as though everything's calm, everything's good, no problem here. And when we hear people bring in news of concern or they feel threatened or anxious, we tend to minimize it and say, oh, we're overreacting. A definite sign of being in denial is not changing anything, just going full steam ahead. When I started working with my clients in coaching, I found in the early stages, most were in this mode. They were just taking it as part of the normal news cycle that would cycle through into something else by tomorrow. But very quickly, when the questions don't go away and the news cycle continues, or you start seeing disruptions in your routine or in your business, it then moves into that anger phase. And you know you're in that anger phase when everything seems generally frustrating. I was working with a client on a workshop they were planning for September. This was still back in late March. And in the conversation, I suggested that we not do detailed planning because we might not know where we are in September. And I was roundly chastised and told to put away that paranoid thinking that I've got and let's stick with the agenda at hand. Needless to say, within 3 weeks, the whole event was canceled. Another sign that you might be in that anger phase, and the anger phase is just that inconvenience, that annoyance, that pushback against the realities that are coming at you. You might find yourself overreacting to small things, small annoyances, little irritations, questions that you just don't want to deal with. My wife says that I get prickly or grouchy when I'm in that frustrating phase of dealing with changes that I can't control. Another sign that you might be in the denial phase is blaming events, blaming others. So as a manager, and I've experienced this, as things begin to go south on you, or a project goes off the rails, things you can't control, your natural instinct in that fight or flight mode is to find something or someone to shine the spotlight on and hold up as the reason for the problem. Another sign of feeling in that anger stage is that feeling of being a victim to events and wanting to rage against all the forces coming against you. And sometimes that rage just creates a dark cloud around you, an intensity that people don't want to be near you, especially your family, or it can act out as well. And we've seen that acting out in recent times on the streets and in social unrest. A third stage is called bargaining, when you're trying to buffer the blow, where you're trying to game the system or beat the odds. So in this particular example of the tower's going to fall. It's inevitable. And all you're trying to do here is buy time by being a little bit more clever than the other person. The underlying emotional logic of the bargaining phase is to ease the anxiety through different kinds of trade-offs, focusing on what I call majoring in the minors, being activity-driven versus outcome-driven, feeling like if I just continue to do little things, that somehow the world or the universe will change in my favor. There's a little bit of an underlying quest to game the system, find ways to get around this, to make it easier for you. Even though events are affecting everybody almost equally, you're trying to give yourself a little bit of a hedge against what everybody else is experiencing. Another sign that you may be in this stage of bargaining is looking for compromises. If I shift my pricing a little bit, can I keep this client? If I give everybody a 20% cut in pay, maybe I can avoid having to do deep cuts. We look for these little trade-offs again to manage our own anxiety and to try to avoid the hard decisions or the hard cuts that we need to make. Another sign that you may be in this phase is you begin to rationalize small things that you're doing as having somehow significant impact when it's just busy work. Another sign that you may be in this phase is when you begin to rationalize or make excuses for certain things as to why they're not working or why you're making certain decisions and doing it the way you're doing it. And finally, there are what I call those indecision decisions. Deciding on small little things that really don't make a difference, but it gives you the feeling that you're doing something. If you've ever heard the phrase running around like chickens with their heads cut off, this is that phase. You're running around trying to be busy and not really making any real impact. You're just trying to manage your anxiety. When none of these seem to work and running out of new ideas, very often you fall into a state of despair. Despair is that giving up zone. It's that zone where you really don't have any more energy. You don't have any more bounce back. You feel like you're in a constant state of anxiety. Your mood shifts. It has this dark tone all of the time. You seem to be resigned to outcomes. This may be when you have the most difficulty sleeping at night. One of the true signs that you're in this mode is you begin to look for unhealthy coping behaviors. You might begin eating more comfort food. You might have more alcohol than you're used to having, or use drugs to help medicate or help you sleep. You may even begin to pick up smoking again or binge watch because of the stress fatigue that you're feeling. When you're in this phase, it feels like you're stuck. You seem to be just spinning your wheels over and over. You're not making any progress despite the effort, so you begin to just go through the motions. There's no real energy or oomph in what you're trying to do. A lot of these are symptoms of depression, and it's quite likely that you are experiencing depression when you're in this stage. Now, the 5 stages of grief also parallel what's called the hero's journey. And when you look at so many of the heroes in the movies that we love and the stories that are compelling and have endured over time, a lot of times the hero is born out of tragedy and goes through this journey process. And at some point in the process, they reach this place called death. It's a death to the past. And so that 4th stage is entering into that death. The death of everything that you valued, the things that you hoped for. They're not coming back anymore. There's a reconciliation that takes place in this stage if you let it do its work. And that is cutting off your attachment to the things that you can no longer control, to the attachments of the things that were in the past. And this is where you come to terms with the reality for what it is. And now you're ready for what's called the new adventure or the rebirth. You know you've gotten to this stage when you begin to feel the worst is over. Or you come to the realization that I can make it. You might begin to see, boy, this is a fresh start. That's what happened to our company during this. In March, I lost 90% of my revenue for the year. It was just gone because of our business model of meeting with people face to face. So what you and I are doing now, this virtual environment, became that fresh start for us. And we've been able to convert our workshops, our keynotes, and our coaching into this virtual environment. You know you've reached the stage of the new adventure or the rebirth when you're okay with there's no turning back. There's no going back to the old way. And I still find many of my clients talking about that they're going to get back and the office is going to be normal maybe next year, maybe a year later. But their hearts and minds are focused on getting back to the way it was. They still haven't let go. They're in one of those 4 stages of grief and loss. When you reach this new stage of having let go, you actually find a new energy, a new relief. The dopamine, that hormone that gives you that excited anticipation, begins coming back into your body again. And then the frozen imagination that you had that could see no options, no way out, begins seeing all kinds of new possibilities. These are the stages that we go through, and managers need to get through them as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to lead other people. I'll give you an example. One of my clients in February was talking about having one of the best meetings they had with their executive leadership team. They were coming off their best year. All the executive team was looking forward to great bonuses that they were going to receive sometime in March. And then the news began to come in March. And I started hearing them talk about how do they posture, how do they position, how do they protect their bonus. When they heard that their bonuses would probably be delayed, then they reached that anger or that bargaining phase. Some of my clients in that company began to feel that despair, money that they had mentally already committed to do, the porch they were going to build, the vacation house they were going to invest in, the money they were going to use for their child's college education was gone now. It took some of my clients at this company 60 to 90 days to process through all of that and come to terms with, okay, what's next? Where do I go from here? But still some are struggling and they're having a hard time of keeping their head in the game. So you really can't lead others if your mind is still on what you've lost and what you're trying to protect and hold on to, because everybody else is going through their sense of loss as well. So the challenge for us as leaders is, how do we process through this as quickly as possible? And you can't do this alone. You need other people to help you verbalize, to externalize what you're feeling. And understanding what these stages are will help you identify where you might be and how do you take that next step to get through it. Because we all will get through it. It all depends on how willing you are to accept the current realities and let go of the past and go on a new adventure to explore what might be possible going forward. When you reach this point, you reach that scene in the movie The Matrix when Morpheus confronted Neo and gave him a choice. It was either the red pill or the blue pill. If he took the red pill, it would go on that uncertain adventure forward. He would be leaving his depressing life behind him. Or he could take the blue pill and go back to the current reality and forget that he ever had the option. We all have that choice of either going into that new adventure, which is uncertain and will be challenging and try us to our very core, or we can go back and try to preserve the old normal. So which pill are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the red pill in the new adventure or the blue pill? And then are you going to be able to help your employees accept the red pill as well and help walk them through? When you get to this point and you accept the red pill, you begin to feel that new sense of adventure. You will gain a new curiosity about what the potential is, and you'll have that explorer's mindset. You will feel freed up to experiment and try new things because nobody knows what the new normal is going to be like. And nobody really knows what's going to work or not. So why not explore? Why not experiment? Why not try? And in our exploration and experimentation and trying, we adapt. We learn, we try, we refine, we adapt. We learn, we try, we refine, we adapt. And that is the new cycle of leadership during this phase of uncertainty. And as we begin to find things that work and things that work better and things that work even better, we refine it and then we master it. And then we begin a new cycle of replicating it in others and growing even further in our mastery. And once you get to this stage, you become the kind of leader that other people are willing to follow because you've done the internal work. The difference in this stage and this kind of problem that we face when we're in this world of what we call the unknown unknowns, it's called adaptive leadership, and it begins internally. The transformation has to take place first inside before we can lead others in a similar journey. These are times when the problems are unknown unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. So we have to be in this mode of experimental leadership. So we don't have the confidence in the direction to just lead. We have to learn as we go. We lead by learning, not by directing, not through confidence, not through problem solving, because we've never been down this road before. So the work begins first internally. It's called transformational leadership. The change has to begin in our mindset to accept the current reality, be comfortable with learning as we go, and to be comfortable with learning together with others and having a collective form of leadership versus a singular form of leadership. Now, in order to create the conditions for this to take place and for everybody to feel safe in this new mode of unknown unknowns, and in order to value it, we have to remove some of the stigma of emotional struggle. We're all going through different phases of emotional struggle. But most of the workplaces that I have either worked in or the companies that I consult with, most of these environments are not what you would call psychologically safe, where you can let your guard down and be vulnerable and be who you really are. Part of that leadership means courage, and it's courage around admitting uncertainty. It's the opposite of heroic leadership. And during times of uncertainty, the tendency for leaders are to step up and look heroic and look confident and look certain. It's the exact opposite of what we're looking for. Now, we're not looking for timid, uncertain, insecure leaders. We're looking for honest leaders. I just don't know. But we'll find out. We've never run into this before, but let's figure out what we can do. We're not sure if this solution will work, so we'll try it and we'll adjust if we need to. It takes a lot of courage to be able to lead like that, but that's the only choice you have if you want people to follow behind you and feel confident that you're the kind of leader that they can trust. As leaders, we need to be more curious and ask deeper questions rather than feeling the pressure to come up with quick solutions and quick answers. We need to keep asking the questions around why. Why does this work the way it does? Why isn't it working? What is the constraint that we're running into? How can we collectively come together and look for some answers? It's going to be hard to remember, but everybody is at some different stage of the 5 stages of grief. They will look different. They will behave differently. And so there's no one size fits all, and we're not all walking through this at the same pace. And people are experiencing things at home that complicate what's happening at work. There needs to be a lot of space and a lot of grace for us to be able to work through these different stages at different paces. Now, during these times of uncertainty and stress and a lot of chaos happening and conflict and different kinds of opinions going on, one common denominator, one common language is our stories. We all have a story. One of the powerful tools that psychologists use and that we can use to help process through very challenging times is our story. To share what happened, to share how it impacted us, to share how we feel about it, to share what we've learned about it, to share where we still feel constrained, to share what we hope for in the future. To help facilitate this, we've created templates for teams that managers can use to help people process through what it was like working from home, or what it's like coming back to the workplace, or some of the conflict and the challenges and the social struggles that we see. And these templates provide a safe way for people to share their story together. And sharing and processing together helps us get through those 5 stages and find hope and renewed energy for that new adventure. While I'm coaching, one of the things I look for in my clients to see how they're processing through is that renewed spark, that willingness to take the challenge, regaining some of that resiliency and that bounce back. As we move forward through this particular period, it may take a year, it may take longer, but I'd like to share with you some of the long-term implications of addressing this very stressful period that we're in. I'd like to introduce you to somebody. His name is Dr. Roizen. He is the Chief Wellness Officer for the Cleveland Clinic. In fact, he's the very first Chief Wellness Officer designated in the United States in 2008. Now, Dr. Roizen is most concerned about a challenge and an existential threat to all of our companies. It's the rise of chronic disease. In just a little bit, I'll make a connection between this challenge and threat to the current situation and the stress that we're experiencing. Chronic disease is considered a lifestyle disease in most cases. 60% of the adult population has some form of chronic disease, and that level is rising at a compounded rate of 7%. Here are some cost projections that will blow you away. This is a graph that Dr. Roizen provided us that we redrew to make it easier to see. The blue line that you see is non-health federal spending, and as you can see that it's fairly flat going out for several decades. The right-hand red line is the projected federal cost for health care increasing over time. And sometime around 2050, it was projected to surpass all non-health related federal spending. But the real figure to look at is the red line in the left. That factors in the health cost with chronic disease. It has already surpassed all federal spending. And why is this significant? Well, it's significant because federal spending is approximately 50% of all health costs. Right now, health costs make up 18% of our nation's GDP. That's approximately $3.5 trillion. 80% of that cost is due to chronic disease. So we've already exceeded that. Sometime around 2025, Dr. Roizen says that the burden of the health costs rising at a 7% compounded rate is going to begin to shut down the economy. So let's put these numbers in the current context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, as we earlier shared with you, we're looking at this through the lens of a mass disaster recovery. So that means the stressors are far greater than what they have normally been. So the numbers I just shared with you, the increase in rise in chronic disease prior to COVID-19. And the significance of this is that when we look at mortality rates, in other words, those who have died because of COVID-19, 92% of them have had some form of chronic disease or what they call underlying health conditions. One of those underlying health conditions is obesity, which leads to metabolic syndrome, which then leads to chronic disease. So they're both related. Dr. Bredesen with UCLA School of Pharmacology said what we really have is a resiliency pandemic. In other words, unless our companies become healthier, then we won't be able to resist things like COVID-19 in the future or other kinds of conditions that create major stress in our workplace. And during this pandemic, we've seen more than 90 million people in the United States alone having experienced either a level 1 or level 2 trauma. We're currently at 40 million people who are unemployed. There were 120 million students released from school, and there's still not a good plan on what we're going to do with them. And it's estimated that about 30 million households have some need of child care where one or the other of the partners or the spouses are staying home to take care of the kids. We're anticipating that more than 14 million, almost half of all of the small businesses, will shut down over the next 6 months. We've also seen entire industries like oil and gas, entertainment, hospitality, and travel completely decimated. This has left a devastating impact on the mental health of the nation. So why is this important for us to talk about here and now? What we've learned is that the 4 major lifestyle behaviors that lead to chronic disease are smoking, overuse of drugs or alcohol, too much of the wrong kind of food, we call it comfort food, and then sedentary or lack of physical activity. So these are the major causes of chronic disease, and in addition to that is lack of sleep. So the Cleveland Clinic has defined these as the primary behaviors that either lead to chronic disease or the 5 solutions to reduce chronic disease. The reason that this is relevant to the current conversation is that the primary driver of these unhealthy coping behaviors is, guess what? It is stress. And the workplace was already listed as the #1 source of high stress. And Dr. Jeffrey Pfeffer's work at Stanford says that work is now the 5th leading cause of death. In fact, heart attacks go up 20% on Mondays. So unless we can deal with this stress issue, and going through loss is a very stressful period, we will continue to have these long-term health challenges that face and threaten the economic viability of all of our companies. So building resiliency has to be a strategy coming out of this pandemic that every company puts as part of their strategic goals. Prior to COVID-19, our research in the book that I wrote, The Healthy Workplace Nudge, identified mental health as the #1 business challenge over the next decade. COVID-19 has made this chronic challenge of slow decline into an acute challenge and an existential threat. Now, one of the things our team did after we finished all of the research on workplace health and well-being is we asked companies, what is your definition of workplace wellness and how do you measure it? And guess what? We couldn't find a single company that had a working definition for their organization or a way to measure it. So we came up with one during a summit that we had at the Mayo Clinic. So imagine the ability to bring your whole self to work every day, to do your best work every day, to go home at the end of the day happier and healthier, and to look forward to coming back the next day. We feel that this is the kind of standard and this is the aspirational goal that we all need to strive for and that we can all achieve. We can move further in this progress, in this process. So as I summarize what we've worked through is that we're all going through some phase of the 5 stages of grief. Some people have gotten all the way through, are in the new adventure. It will be very difficult for you to lead others if you're still carrying baggage of loss that you're dealing with as well. And remember, your employees are also going through these 5 stages, so we have to be attuned to what they are. Review this presentation and look at some of the symptoms and the signs of what stage you might be in and those that you manage might be in. And let's work together to get through this, because we will get through this together and we will work towards that better, more healthy, resilient place. I think this is teaching all of us that we need to take better care of each other. I know that you're participating in this webinar for that very reason, and I'm here to support you in any way possible. So if you have any questions or would like any further support, you can reach me at my website, which is www.rexmiller.com, or just send me an email, which is rex@rexmiller.com. Thank you very much for your time.